This evening, I would like to focus on John chapter 11, verse 35. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. It has some profound ideas in it. I'm nervous of preaching on a sole verse because so often that's an excuse, it's a hook just to hang some ideas on, but I hope it will be appropriate. Before that, this morning, I want to look at the setting in which that verse is to be found, the whole of chapter 11. So that then we can focus on verse 35, having set the context. John 11 is the middle chapter of John's Gospel. John 35 is almost the middle verse. There we are. A couple of months ago, Tash and I went to a performance of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe in the Wales Millennium Centre in Cardiff Bay. It was very impressive with some novel stage work. And despite my reputation, we turned up on time, and yet we had to queue up to go in. We were late to go in. We weren't the only late ones. The whole audience was kept outside those doors until things were properly ready inside. Because a play goes on, well, everything needs to be in its place. Props need to be set up. The stage needs to be set for all its visuals, and so on. Likewise, in a theatre, not in a play theatre, in a medical theatre, things need to be set up just right. The lights need to be set in the correct place to illuminate the operation. The tools needed for the routine work need to be laid out in order, everything counted so that they finish with the same number of tools they started with. Maybe there needs to be some emergency equipment nearby just in case things go wrong, and so on. Things must be prepared, in place, ready for the task that is at hand. Well, in John chapter 11, we see the stage being set for Easter. Jesus has been away from Jerusalem for safety's sake. At the end of chapter 10, which I spared you, but we only would have had to read the end of chapter 10, and we'd see the Jews, and by that, John usually means the religious leaders who are opposed to Jesus, that the Jews are growing more and more opposed to the message of Jesus. And indeed, in John chapter 10, verses 31 and 39, they are trying to seize him. They're trying to stone him. Now, Jesus escapes their hands and he travels away. John 10, verse 40 says, beyond the Jordan to the place where John was baptizing at first, and there he stayed. Now, John chapter 1, verse 28 tells us where John was baptizing. It's in the AV, in the New King James, it calls it Bethabara, or Bethany beyond the Jordan, as most translations have it, probably more accurately. So already that's confusing because we're dealing with two different Bethanies, okay? So there's Bethany beyond Jordan. That's where Jesus has gone to. This is well up in the north. It's at least 50 miles away from Jerusalem. So for safety's sake, Jesus has, at the start of this chapter, Jesus has traveled far away from Jerusalem. He's far away from the hands of those who wish him harm. He's been ministering in that area to the north. A repeated refrain in John's gospel is where Jesus says, "My hour has not yet come." But now in this chapter, John chapter 11, his hour is, if not here yet, it's drawing near. The time for things to start is almost in place. It's probably the month of February, 30 AD. It's probably about 2 months before the crucifixion. His time is drawing near, the time to fulfill the plans for which he came into this world, the time to fulfill the purpose that the Father has given him. By the end of chapter 11, which is one reason why I read into the beginning of chapter 12 as well, Jesus is going to be put right back on the radar of the Jews who want to kill him. Concrete plans are going to be made to put him to death, to find him, to locate him, to be handed over. He's going to be in the vicinity of Jerusalem. He's going to be ready for the task that lies ahead. To put it another way, as a result of what happens in John chapter 11, the religious leaders are going to have means, motive, and opportunity. So let's look at the events of this chapter. So the background is this. Jesus and his 12 disciples, they've traveled away to the region of Perea, Bethabara, or Bethany beyond Jordan, 50 miles to the north. Meanwhile, in the other town called Bethany, only 2 miles from Jerusalem, there's this little family who live there. 2 sisters and a brother, Martha and Mary and Lazarus. They are close friends of Jesus. Jesus has in the past enjoyed staying there. He has taught in their house. They're very fond of him. Martha's probably the older sister and Mary the younger one, given the way their names are usually mentioned. Now, whether Lazarus is the big brother in the family or he's the youngest baby brother in the family, we don't know. But it seems to be a loving and a happy house. And we've got words recorded in Scripture from both Mary and Martha, but Lazarus never speaks in the Bible. Perhaps he was just less talkative than his loquacious siblings. Now, although Jesus is safely away from the Jews who are in Jerusalem, this little family know how to find him. They know where he is staying. And so when Lazarus falls ill, they seek to get in touch with Jesus. They send a messenger to find him. Verse 3, the sisters sent to him. So clearly, they're not sending a telegram or a text message. They're sending someone with a message to find this man who's in some ways hiding away. And look at the message that they send. They say, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. It's a tender message, isn't it? Jesus has been ministering for 2 or 3 years by now. He has worked great miracles in that time. He has healed all sorts of diseases. He's helped those with various needs. He has demonstrated mighty power to heal even from a distance. The Bethany siblings don't demand Jesus' presence. Instead, knowing that his life is in danger in Jerusalem, which is only a half-hour walk away, they don't insist he does anything. They certainly don't demand he comes to them. But they want to inform him of the situation. They want to give him knowledge of what's going on. Perhaps he can help. Perhaps he will come. They don't even seek to manipulate him with, compel him with manipulative language. Just to let you know, we who have done so much for you, now we need help. There's nothing like that. They don't speak of their love for Jesus. They speak of his love for Lazarus. The one you love is sick. The messenger travels to where Jesus is. Probably far from Bethany near Jerusalem, off to Bethany beyond Jordan. It's at least 2 days' travel. There's the crossing of a large river needed as well. Did the messenger find Jesus straight away? Did he have to ask around until he found Jesus and his disciples? The messenger arrives and he passes on the news. And Jesus gives this reassuring message. This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Oh, isn't that wonderful to hear when you've got someone dying? And it would seem, implied, we can't be sure, but it would seem that those words are taken back by the messenger to Mary and Martha, those words of comfort, those words of assurance. Jesus doesn't immediately set out to go there with the original message carrier. I mean, why should he? This sickness isn't unto death, so there's no urgency, is there? We hear of people who are ill, and, if possible, we want to go and visit them. Take them a bunch of flowers, say, do you need me to pick up anything? I'll run some errands for you, and so on. But if you know someone's dying imminently, you hurry to their bedside. You want to get there before too late. Now, given that this sickness isn't unto death, Jesus doesn't have to rush into the danger zone near Jerusalem. Good. The messenger comes back to Bethany near Jerusalem with this helpful and encouraging word. And yet, as the messenger comes back, this house he left 5-6 days earlier, it's now a house of mourning, not a house of sickness. The messenger gets back, because he leaves 2 days before Jesus. He arrives, and Lazarus has been dead for 2 days already. So how can those words of Jesus make any sense in this circumstance? This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. We know bad things happen in this world. Sadness, sorrows arise. The older we live, the more we get used to tragedies. But what do we do when things that we thought were reliable fail us? Those words of Jesus must have seemed like a puzzle, a distress to Mary and Martha. They don't immediately doubt Jesus. They've seen much of his power. They've delighted in his teaching. They trust in him implicitly. But this is confusing. And assuming it's about a 2-day journey from Bethany beyond Jordan to Bethany near Jerusalem, about the time the messenger gets back to Bethany by Jerusalem, Jesus tells his disciples that they're going to return to the region of Judea. And that doesn't seem like a good idea to them. Why go where you're not welcome? Why stir up trouble unnecessarily? Verse 8, lately the Jews sought to stone you. In verse 9, Jesus basically says, there are things to be done at the right time, and you can't put them off. And he then explains he must go and wake up Lazarus, before explaining more bluntly in verse 14 that Lazarus is already dead. Now, if Jesus had set out straight away and not delayed 2 days, he still would have not got there in time before Lazarus died. Lazarus probably arrived about the time that messenger arrived with Jesus. But then Jesus delays another 2 days. And verse 6 tells us why. Well, let's read verse 5 and then verse 6. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Verse 6 says, the reason he delayed was because of his love for them. That's deep, isn't it? If you loved a family with a dying relative, wouldn't you try and get there straight away, even if it was too late to say goodbye to the one who was dying? The purposes of God's are not always what we would expect. That hymn of William Cowper's that we sang after the children's talk, God moves in a mysterious way, is in the section of the hymn book entitled Providence, that which God provides to us. Now, God often provides good things to us, doesn't he? Happiness and joys and comforts and blessings. What do we do when he provides things that we don't like? Unfair accusations, car accidents, cruelty from others, and so on. That hymn talks about unpleasant things, storms, and a fearful cloud, a frowning providence, buds that have a bitter taste, and so on. And yet it says behind all those things is a purpose. It's not seen by the eyes, because we see only loss and sadness. But it is seen by faith, a trust in the one who provides all these things. The purposes that Jesus has are not clearly seen at this point. But in verse 15, he points towards it. He says, I am glad to the disciples, I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. What is to unfold is going to lead to disciples believing in Jesus. Instead of staying far from danger in Jerusalem, Jesus is going there, or to the very nearby, the place that is, he's going towards the place that is actively seeking his death. And then we have the words of Thomas, verse 16. And just on a side note, I love Thomas so much. Mr. Despondent and Mr. Depressed is also Mr. Devoted. If Jesus is adamant he's going to go to his death, Thomas says, we're going to go with him and we're going to die alongside him. And that is such love and commitment. Maybe Thomas is better in his words than his actions, even if a time later, well, like all the others, he sees his courage fail at Jesus' arrest and runs away. But those are wonderful words. I love them so much. Jesus and the 12 travel that 2 or 3 day journey back down south. They arrive at Bethany, but they don't go into the town itself. Maybe somehow Jesus already knows that Lazarus is dead, so maybe they go towards the burial area on the outskirts of the town or something like that. And when they arrive, Jesus finds out that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days already, verse 17. So the most logical thing is that someone tells him. Mary and Martha they're not at by the grave. We wouldn't stay there. They're in the family home in the house of mourning. And visitors have come, some from Jerusalem, to mourn alongside them. And the news reaches them now that at last, too late for Lazarus, Jesus is here. And Martha comes out to meet him. Verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's not a rebuke. That's an expression of her faith. Oh, you had such power. I know you've got such power. And if only we'd been able to reach you, if only you hadn't been so far away, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. She says that with confidence. She's seen great miracles of healing. She doesn't doubt the power of Jesus. But then she says, verse 22, but even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. could something else be possible? It's as though Martha believes that maybe Jesus might still be able to do something, but she hardly dares hope that it's possible. Because Lazarus has been dead 4 days. Now, Jesus has raised other people from the dead, hasn't he? Jairus' daughter, but she'd only been dead a matter of minutes or hours when Jesus got to her bedside. So it's not really the same. There was the son of the widow of Nain, but Jesus raised him to life in the midst of a funeral procession. And in hot climates with poor embalming practices, well, you bury the dead person the same day. So even that boy had only been raised hours after he died. But Lazarus, it's been half a week. No one has ever been resurrected after this long. There are 3 specific resurrections recorded in the Old Testament. All of them seem about the same day as the death of the one who died. Lazarus seems to be in a different league. His death seems to be so much more final. There's this grief and this confusion in this heart of Martha, alongside hope and uncertainty. Her faith in Jesus seems unshaken, though everything else around her is in crisis. Where are we to look in times of despair, when everything seems to be falling apart, when we look at all the outcomes and they're all bad, there's no good outcome possible? Where do we look when death is approaching, or after death it's approached in its final terribleness? Where does Jesus point Martha? Verse 25. He points her to himself. Now, she believes in a final resurrection of all the dead in verse 24. But Jesus says, you believe in a resurrection on the last day. Where do you think resurrection and life comes from? From me, says Jesus. He claims to be the death defeater, the conqueror of the grave, the ultimate giver of life. Though one may even be dead, if he's believing in Jesus, he will live. And the one who is believing in Jesus will never truly die. Do you believe this? Jesus asks Martha. Her testimony, verse 27, said in the hour of grief, with a voice that has been sobbing and grieving for the last 4 days, says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into this world. In the midst of her uncertainty and her misery, she continues to look to Jesus. Is he yet going to disappoint her? She sends for Mary, who runs and falls down at the feet of Jesus. And together with other mourners who have come from the house, they are led to the grave itself. It's not a plot of land with a coffin 6 foot under. It's a tomb. It's a cave with a stone rolled across it. And it's not a hermetically sealed tomb. The stink of death and decay hangs in the air. You don't hang around here to mourn. You go back to the house where at least it doesn't stink. Having buried their brother, they've already retreated from this place of decay and filth and uncleanness. And everything that they're seeing tells them there's no hope. Their memories tell them there's no hope. Their life experience tells them there's no hope. The things they have seen tell them there's no hope. Even the things they smell tell them there is no hope. Everything there says there is no hope, except the words of Jesus. Again, he speaks. Take away the stone. And again, Martha's faith, which she expressed in verse 27, her faith falters once again. Jesus reminds her, believe and you will see the glory of God. We see by faith, not always by sight. And Jesus prays, the Father will not refuse his eternally begotten Son. He has sent him to redeem the world, and this visible victory over death is a clear testimony and sign of who Jesus is. And then he commands the dead. Lazarus, come forth. Ears that have not worked for days, hear. Legs long stiffened by rigor mortis, move. Outside of the grave, a shuffling is heard. And then this bandaged figure emerges from the gloom of the cave. Now, zombie films and TV programs have been quite popular in recent years. This idea of the dead being reanimated, of corpses dragging themselves from the ground, of the undead preying upon the living. Don't mistake that for this episode. As the bandages are removed from Lazarus, the skin is fresh and clean. He comes from a place of stink and death, himself restored and whole. What did Jesus say? This sickness is not unto death, or this sickness will not end in death. This sickness may have taken a detour through death, but that's not where it ended up. Would you like to have been there? Would you like to have seen that? Would it have strengthened your faith? Certainly, it strengthened the faith of the disciples, just as Jesus promised in verse 15. Verse 45 tells us, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw the things Jesus did believed in him. It blessed Mary and Martha, just as in verse 6, because of his love, or so he stayed there those 2 days longer. Many of those Jews who were there put their trust in Jesus in some form. You weren't there. You haven't seen this, but you've seen something like this. Over and over again, the voice of God speaking with such power that dead ears hear, and still hearts begin to beat, and silent lips begin to speak. The great tragedy of physical death is not the worst thing that this world can hold, agonizing and even life-changing though it can be. Spiritual death is a far worse thing. Physical death separates us from our loved ones. Spiritual death separates us from the love of God. Without new life from God, we are dead. We're stinking Lazarus in the tomb, dead in our transgressions and sins. In this spiritual death in which the Christian used to live, we followed the ways of this world, of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, of the spirit that's now at work in the sons of disobedience. All of us lived amongst them at one time, gratifying the cravings of the sinful nature, following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were objects of wrath. We were dead. But the voice of Christ speaks to the spiritually dead. It rings in our ears, and it renews our hearts, and it brings forth praise from lips that have never praised before. How does God do this? Faith, Romans 10 says, comes by hearing by the word of God. When the word of God, the word of Christ, goes out, in scripture, in preaching, in conversation, in leaflets, in blog posts, whatever it may be, when that word goes out, God brings new life to dead souls. The miracle of Lazarus is astonishing, but greater works, greater miracles are happening every day as Christ brings life, new life, everlasting life to his people, transferring men and women and boys and girls from the kingdom of Satan into his glorious kingdom. That is life that never ends. Life that sees no death, life that conquers death, life that is now, but life that is yet more glorious in the world that is to come. Have you known this? Have you experienced it for yourself? Have you seen it in others? Do you long to see the Almighty Christ working through his word to bring life and light to a dark and dying world? This miracle is the final of 7 miracles or signs in the Gospel of John. It demonstrates the power of Christ over the greatest of enemies. It invites us and it commands us to trust in him. Truly, he is the King who conquers. Now, that happened at the time. There were many who put their faith in him. 11 of the 12 disciples were strengthened in their faith. One saw this and then shortly thereafter went to betray Jesus himself. Some of the Jews went to the Pharisees and spoke to them about it. Maybe they didn't all go for malicious purposes. Maybe some of them were looking for reward or something like that. But maybe some of them said, "See, how do you explain this? Doesn't this show that Jesus is the Messiah?" Whatever the purposes, the motives of those who reported to the Pharisees, the enemies of Christ have been roused to act. Verse 47 shows that they do not doubt the reality of the miracles of Christ. It's not the convincing of the power of Christ that it's needed. but their hearts remain dead and cold. Without the power of God coming to them, they are resistant to the profound truth and reality of who Jesus is. All they see is the threat he poses to their own prestige, their power, their position. They dress up their opposition to Jesus in pious and patriotic language. But really, they just hate him. They hate his claims. They will not submit themselves to him. And finally, there's this chap, Caiaphas, mentioned in verse 49. He was the high priest. He was supposed to be a clear example of the Messiah, the one who intercedes between God and man. And he speaks not with the wise grace of the true Messiah, but with words of arrogance and intemperance. You know nothing at all, you idiots. You don't get it, do you? Better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to perish. He speaks words of arrogance and disdain, words of hatred towards Christ, words of rejection of the purposes of God. He is one of the most unpleasant characters in the pages of the New Testament. Venal, vile, hypocritical. And yet in these very words, as Caiaphas means one thing, God's allowing him to speak prophetically. Caiaphas wanted Jesus put to death to preserve his own position and reputation. But actually, the killing of Christ is going to result in a national rescue. Not the state of Israel, which 40 years later is going to be smashed after this point, but the nation of the true people of God, Jew and also Gentile. In his boasting words, Caiaphas is speaking of a far greater deliverance than he himself intended, because the death of Jesus Christ is going to bring about a redemption for all creation, a rescue for all of his people, a reuniting of divided people groups into the one glorious church of God. So from that day, it says, they plotted to take his life, looking to seize him. The stage is set. The characters are in place. We're ready for the anointing of Jesus at the hands of Mary. We're ready for Palm Sunday. We're ready for the Passion Week. We're ready for the crucifixion. That man says he's ready. Are you ready? As you look at these words, with whom do you most identify? Are you Caiaphas, violently opposed to God and his Messiah? Are you still Lazarus, passive, even dead, stinking in the tomb, but hearing the voice of Christ coming forth in new life? Are you Martha, struggling to believe, clinging to Jesus even as your doubts fight back and seem to seek to extinguish your faith? Are you Thomas, with all of his despondency and depression, pledging to follow Jesus no matter the cost, wherever it may lead? When it comes to those despairing thoughts, those things that would pull us away from looking to Christ, I told the children about William Cowper. I didn't talk all about the detail. I didn't talk about how after that glorious vision of the glory of the beauty of Christ, that he had many, many years of despondency, that he attempted suicide 3 or 4 times, that in his better times he wrote some glorious hymns, but in his dark times some of the poems are so bleak. I didn't speak about how even in his last days he was in misery and despair, although there is an account of a very final deathbed assurance of faith. But one of the things I read looking up William Piper was by John Piper. William Cowper was by John Piper. And he said, lessons to be learned from William Cowper. Well, the first thing is this, and I'm only going to read the first thing. And this is just a direct quote from John Piper. We fortify ourselves against the dark hours of depression by cultivating a deep distrust in the certainties of despair. Despair is relentless in the certainties of his pessimism. But even Cowper was not consistent throughout his letters and poems. Some years after his absolute statements of being cut off from God, he again expressed some hope. His certainties were not sureness. So it will always be with the deceptions of darkness. Let us now, while we have the light, cultivate distrust of the certainties of despair. I think what Piper is saying there is, when everything in us tells us we cannot go on, when everything around us tells us there is no hope, Do we trust those things? Do we trust even what's going on in our own heads? Or do we trust the words of Jesus Christ above that and beyond that? Your need is to look to Jesus, to trust him, to take him at his word, to rely upon his character. He is faithful, he is loving, he is almighty, he is the resurrection and the life. Hear him, follow him, cling to him, be devoted to him. You'll find he never fails you. At times, the next step may seem difficult or hard to understand, but look what he did. Every step, he took the next step that God laid before him. He used the time apportioned. There were 12 hours in the day, and he used them appropriately and rightly. He marched to Jerusalem. He climbed Calvary. He died and rose again that you might know newness of life. He's the conquering king. He's the one who gives new life to all who hear his voice. Have you heard? Have you responded? Well, we can respond with the words of our last hymn, 531. The one who can say, Lord, I was blind. I could not see in thy marred visage any grace, but now the beauty of thy face in radiant vision dawns on me. Lord, I was deaf, the second verse says. Lord, I was dumb, the third verse said. Lord, I was dead, says the fourth verse. I could not stir my lifeless soul to come to thee. But now, since thou hast quickened me, I rise from sin's dark sepulchre. Hymn 531.